Test. There we go. Welcome, everyone. We appreciate you coming. On behalf of the Orilla District Chamber of Commerce, we want to welcome everyone here this evening. Can everyone hear me okay, first of all? Great. We've got mics on all the candidates, and so hopefully you'll all be able to hear all of the questions and comments very well. On behalf of the Chamber, first of all, my name is Dean Beers. I'm the president for this particular year, and I wanted to give a real warm welcome to all of you. We really do appreciate. Rob, are you not used to sitting up here? Or we really did want to give you a warm welcome. We appreciate the time that you take to come out. In our democracy, it's very important to have feedback, to hear from people, and so thank you. We appreciate that you taking the time. As well, for the candidates, thank you for taking the time. I'm sure this is a little bit of a daunting part of your job to be able to answer questions and be put on the spot, but we do appreciate the time that you take. We also want to say thank you to Lakeland Association of Realtors. They sponsored this event this evening, and without them, we probably wouldn't be able to do it. So thank them, as well as Rogers TV tonight for putting this on TV. For people that couldn't make it tonight, they will be able to see it on TV. So in saying that, I want to introduce our moderator for this evening. Probably many of you know Raquel Ness. What I'm going to do is I'd like to read her bio. I normally would sooner just tell you about somebody, but Raquel has done a lot in our community. It's wonderful to see what I call a younger person anyway, getting so involved. And I would like to read her bio because I think it's tremendous to see someone of her age being so involved. Raquel Ness, co-director of the Ripple of Kindness Orilla chapter, needs no introduction to the local community. Her spirited approach to Orilla has launched her career, where she takes great pride in networking across the city in an array of events. Raquel is a local lawyer. She recently launched Ness Law, which is already finding success and building her entrepreneurial foundation. Despite her young age, she boasts a wealth of community commitment and giving back to the town where she grew up in. Having been involved in the Child Advocacy Center, the Chamber of Commerce, the Law Association of Orilla, and lobbyist for young residents and like-minded women to grow their own success in Simcoe County. With her roots in Orilla, Raquel traveled and studied abroad to undertake education and experience life. Along the journey, she met her New Zealand husband and brought him back to Canada to establish the next chapter together. Among other endeavors, Hartley Hawes, an executive co-working space, is set to be written as one of the new undertakings the two have together, and Raquel will be sure to be vocal this exciting challenge. So thank you, Raquel. We appreciate the time you've put into this as well, and I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Dean. So I'd like to start off by saying thank you and welcome to everybody, and we are very happy to have you here this evening for the 2019 Federal All Candidates meeting. This meeting is brought to you by the Orilla District Chamber of Commerce, and tonight's event, as Dean had mentioned, is sponsored by Lakeland Association of Realtors. The Orilla District Chamber of Commerce represents the active voice of business and is actively participating in tonight's debate and hoping that the candidates will specifically address the business community. For tonight's debate, each candidate will have 5 minutes opening speech, and the candidates will have drawn from the order of the speeches already, which I will advise you of shortly. The timer will hold up a flag with the 30 seconds and then wave it 15 seconds. And then at the end of the 5-minute buzzer will go off at each speech. We ask that all fairness and you respect each other at all times as allotted. The federal election is scheduled to take place on October 21st, 2019, and we urge you all to please vote. I will now introduce the candidates. Starting from my left, I have Stephen Makk from the People's Party of Canada. Valerie Powell, Green Party. Gerry Hawes, Liberal. And then to my right, Chris Brown, Heritage Party. Angelique Belcourt, NDP. Bruce Stanton, Conservative. Further, I want to thank all of the media for coming out. We've got 3 specific people I would like to just mention here. The first being John Swartz of Sun and Line Media. Second, Nathan Taylor from OrillaMatters.com. And then third, Frank Matties from Orilla Today. Next, we will have 4 questions. 2 of those are from the Orilla District Chamber of Commerce, and then the further 2 are from the the Lakeland Association of Realtors. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer. With 15 seconds left, the timer will be raised and the flag to give you an indication to wrap up your answer. The buzzer will go at the time when everything is up, and we would respectively ask you to stop talking at that time. And please be cognizant of the other parties as well. I'm going to start off with the first District Chamber of Commerce question. Pardon me. I would like to first introduce all the candidates. Furthermore, after I have already done so, in accordance with the actual draw that we have already done, I will give each candidate their number. And the first is Valerie Powell.
Fellow citizens, candidates, Lakehead Realtors, and Chamber organizers, good day, bonjour, bonjour. Many of you already know me. For those who do not, I'm Valerie Powell, your federal Green Party candidate. I have been on the ballot before, twice federally and twice provincially. And as the Green Party gains momentum across Canada, I had thought it was a good time to provide this wonderful opportunity to a new, younger candidate. But our political process can discourage the hopeful. Political mudslinging caused our nominated candidate to resign. The negative attack style of campaigning increases voter apathy, lowering the already low number of people who actually vote. I am running to restore voter choice and our democracy by ensuring that you have a Green candidate. This election, I am running out of sheer determination to make a difference and to represent you in Ottawa. Our democracy is in crisis. Trudeau promised that 2015 would be the last federal election using the archaic first-past-the-post system. Promised that we would have a fair voting system where your vote really counts. If he had kept this promise, as an experienced Green in Elizabeth May's shadow cabinet, I would probably be going to Ottawa. And we need more Greens in Ottawa because we not only have a democracy crisis, we have a looming climate crisis. Listen to our youth and to Greta Thunberg. Our house is on fire. Our survival, our grandchildren's survival, depends on how you vote in this election. We, the Greens, have a 20-step climate action plan, and you can pick a copy up at our booth. Starting now, we will need all MPs from all parties to work together to create a solid climate action plan to avoid a climate catastrophe. If a party gets a majority with only 39% of the vote, as now, and that's of those who voted, they will hold 100% of the power and will control your future. A party with a weak climate plan, or worse yet, no climate plan, should not control your future. We need what was promised, electoral reform with a proportional voting system designed for Canadians. A majority of Canadians from all parties want a proportional system. For this reason, I am more determined than ever before to get elected, to fight for your democracy and your livable future on this planet. For those of you who don't know me, I am passionate about the arts and seniors and community. Growing up in Orilla gave me opportunities. I went to the Ontario College of Art, married my high school sweetheart, who became City of Orilla's deputy engineer. I have been a practicing artist, a hobby farmer, a small business owner. I have served as an executive director with the Lung Association and later with the Alzheimer's Society. I contributed a weekly story to CBC Radio Ontario Morning and later became their arts journalist. We raised 2 children in Orilla, and then I returned full-time to university. With a Master's of Science in Aging Research, I spent the next 20 years in healthcare, consulting to hospitals, long-term care, and community throughout Simcoe County to assist staff and families caring for seniors with behaviors due to dementia. I now live in Orilla with my husband, a 5-year stroke survivor. I am the seniors critic for both the Green Party of Ontario and the Green Party of Canada, and both our children work full-time in the arts. My dedication to cultural, social, and environmental issues is what drives me to volunteer for local organizations, such as Sustainable Orilla, Orilla Age-Friendly Advisory Committee, and the Alzheimer's Society of Simcoe County. My vision for a better future is reflected in Green Party values and policies and our fully costed platform, which is online. I believe that Green Party leader Elizabeth May provides a strong voice in Parliament and will lead to create a more sustainable future for my children's children's children. I am committed, experienced, and energetic. I am proud to run as the Green Party candidate in Simcoe North, and I ask you to vote for what you believe in on October 21st. And I hope that vote is for me, Valerie Powell.
Thank you, Valerie. Next will be Angelique Belcourt.
Rookie. Tanshibo show, everyone. My name is Angelique Belcourt. I'm here to represent the candidacy for the NDP party of Simcoe North. First, I'm going to introduce myself to Anishinaabe. It's important for me as an Indigenous woman to honor my roots here in Simcoe North. So, Odamin Gazis Asianisque Indigenacause, Wapshkanis Dodam, Benadangwashin Ndunjaba. Et aussi, c'est important pour moi que je me présente en français. Je viens d'une petite communauté métis, all the Penetangwashin à Perkinsfield. Ma famille a vécu là presque toute ma vie et ont été là pour beaucoup de temps jusque les Métis ont habité là-bas. So for those of you who don't speak French, I just introduced myself as Angelique Belcourt. My family comes from a small town just in Perkinsfield, a traditionally Métis community. It's important for me to honor my French background and coming from this territory as an Indigenous woman and honor the Huron-Wendat and Anishinaabe people who've lived here for many, many years. For those who don't know me, I'm a new candidate, and I have spent my life, my short life, dedicated to helping improving life for people all around me. Specifically, I've worked with Indigenous populations here at home, in Toronto, and around the province. And while working as a social worker, I encountered the various socio and economic barriers that people face in their everyday lives that prevent them from being able to do the things that they want to do to make their goals a reality and contribute to the economy. Simple things that we take for granted, such as affordable housing, accessibility to education, pharmacare. These are fundamental rights that I believe that all Canadians should have, and therefore why the NDP party platform aligns strongly with my views. So I'm known for leaving my speeches short and sweet. I do speak from the heart. So on October 21st, I hope that you'll consider voting NDP. We want to make a change for all Canadians and make sure that you have all the supports that you need to be able to be the best for you, your families, and this economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelique. Okay, so next we have Chris Brown.
Thank you. As our name implies, the Christian Heritage Party, CHP, strongly believes in the Christian component of our heritage that formed our laws and freedoms, the very same freedoms now under threat. I don't see myself as a politician at all. I know my chances of being elected are remote. It is my hope to encourage you to step closer to God by rejecting the leadership that has sold out God's blessings on our once great nation, and vote for the only true hope, a political return to our Christian roots. I'm a father of 2. I have 4 grandkids. I worked in child and youth services for many years in the GTA, and I'm retired now. I live on the Trent in a home built by my parents back in the 50s. I'm new in politics and got involved because many Christian issues, like abortion, seem to have been forgotten about. I ask you, Is this the same Canada that once upheld biblical values? We have taken and continue to take paths that not only don't reflect the faith that once built this nation and are instead embracing a humanist ideology that has destroyed civilizations throughout history. There are many serious issues facing our country, putting Canada in a watershed moment like never before. Globalism is a glowing threat worldwide, and we have already got globalist leaders here now. The politically correct have hijacked our free speech, dividing it and us into what is acceptable or who is a hater, followed by censorship and threats. This may well be Canada's last free election before the boot of globalism and PC culture snuffs out the last traces of our traditional voice. But the most significant issue of them all is our fall from God's grace. Without his guidance, we have let rot into our culture that we can see the symptoms of: abortion for convenience sake, and an eroding morality that reflects a consuming secular mindset. Many of us see wrong now being called right and wonder where all this will take us. CHP will not surrender 1 inch of our sovereignty to international entities intent upon establishing world governing authority. The UN's agendas and compacts would have no foothold here, not 1 inch. CHP supports the most important freedom we have: speech. Our traditional voice will not be silenced. M103, the Liberals' Islamophobia motion, is but one example of a free speech killer. And by not taking absolute stands against such things, the Greens, the NDP, and to a disappointing degree the Conservatives are following the Liberal Party down the road to eventually losing all of our sovereign freedoms. If we lose the freedom of speech, our other freedoms are defenseless, and our free Canada will be no more. We reject all legislation that imposes restrictions on the expression of opinion and vigorously promote the free exchange of ideas in the public square. CHP stands for controlled, limited immigration and tailored vetting of all, and a strict process to citizenship based on learning of our heritage. We all should take to heart the chilling words said years ago by Chief Officer of Migration at the UN, Peter Sutherland. Quote, "We will use mass migration and multiculturalism to destroy the nation state, and once destroyed, we will control them politically. CHP will not permit weaponized mass migration to reduce our land to Justin Trudeau's post-national state. CHP stands for a clean environment with all industry in full respect of it. Pollution controls would be applied, and environmental recovery would be the law. We reject the hysteria surrounding man-made climate change, and we are decidedly unconvinced of the questionable science behind it. We would support a much broader spectrum of scientific study before reaching any final conclusions, but a carbon tax on Canadians is a blatant tax grab. CHP asserts that the traditional family is the building block of a thriving society, and that the marriage of one man to one woman is the bedrock of that family. This is the only concept that government should endorse. Anything less is a path to social discord and breakdown. We reject the redefinitions of marriage and family that have become acceptable today. Life, from conception to natural death, is God-given, and that government has a responsibility to ensure all means needed to facilitate this beyond adequate to all involved, from early adoption intervention to a tailored use of palliative care to ensure a painless end of life. We reject the disrespect for life that has invaded our land. CHP is the only party committed to this, and we're the only pathway for voters to remain untarnished from abortion's bloodied stain. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. The next will be Stephen Makk.
Hello, friends. Et bonjour, mes amis. I am new to all this as well, but I see this as a competitive advantage because it is time for change. Time to break out of the liberal, conservative, deep state duopoly without a distinction. I'm not a typical politician. I would be very different from who you have now and very different from these other choices. Simcoe North needs fresh, more forceful, and more effective representation in Ottawa. I can provide this as a People's Party candidate because I would first answer to you, not to my party, not to my charismatic and statesman-like party leader Maxime Bernier, not the entrenched Ottawa system, not to any interest groups, and not the UN. I would be an MP the way the founders of our country intended, an independent, free representative of the free people of Simcoe North. Parties say and followers repeat, vote for Scheer, vote for Trudeau. No, you won't. Not unless you happen to live in a small patch of Saskatchewan or a particular neighborhood of Montreal. You are voting for a person from among us up here to represent all of you before the rest of Canada. You must choose the one of us you trust most to do the job of being a lawmaker, debater, committee member, and communicator, who is able to understand, process, and explain complex ideas. Not just somebody in tune with Simcoe North, but who will also think about the greater good of Canada and who has a vision of how to make it even better. A smile at a barbecue is not enough. This is not a popularity contest. This is a job interview. I was born in Canada to refugee parents, and I grew up here. I earned a degree in engineering science from the University of Toronto, and I'm an electronics engineer with over 30 years' experience in technical, managerial, and executive roles. I live and work in Victoria Harbour, here on the shores of beautiful Georgian Bay. I run a family business with my wife Rena and my 2 sons. Our high-tech operation employs people from this community and exports all around the world. I know how to get things done, and I know how to make a dollar count. I am a People's Party of Canada candidate. This makes me unique because we are a party that has clearly stated core principles, not just a basket of policies and handouts. These principles are individual freedom, personal responsibility, fairness, and respect. Can you tell me what the other party's core principles are? The PPC's top value is freedom, especially the freedom to think, speak, and be heard without interference. That means I will listen to you, regardless of your political preferences. Because we do not believe in groups, just individuals, I will treat everybody as an unhyphenated Canadian. I care about your ideas, rights, freedoms, and agency as a person, nothing else. Please consider that your best representative might not necessarily be with the party you normally prefer. Pick one of the big party candidates, and you get a potted plant backbencher whipped to vote the way the back office says. Pick a placeholder paper candidate, well, I don't know what you're going to get. But pick a PPC candidate, and you will get somebody who will stand up in Parliament and speak freely, forcefully, and relentlessly for you. When the Speaker of the House gives me my turn to speak, he will refer to me, your representative, not my party, not my leader. He will refer to the honourable member for Simcoe North. I ask you to let me be exactly that. My top issue in this election is the scope and role of government. Our governments have been steadily growing in size, cost, and influence over our lives while becoming more and more out of touch with people like us. This trend must stop. The People's Party of Canada is here to turn it around. We will reduce your taxes all around and leave more money with you. We will not try to bribe you with your own money and, more importantly, not bribe you with your neighbor's money. We will dig deep, analyze, and address root causes. We can do this best locally, personally, and voluntarily. When we are freer, we are stronger and find a confident unity.
Thank you, Stephen.
Push back, you can move forward.
Okay, next. And next we'll have Bruce Stanton.
Thank you, Raquel. Good evening. Bonjour. It's first of all, I'd like to take a moment to thank the Orilla District Chamber of Commerce and the Lakelands Association of Realtors for organizing tonight's debate, and also to the City of Orilla for giving us the council chamber here for us and for you. As many of you know, I've served as your MP since 2006. I was born and raised here, and Heather and I and our family have worked here all our lives. Our business was just north of here at Bayview Wildwood Resort, where I spent my childhood and career before entering into public life in 2005. My late father, Ron, and mother, Reen, always taught us the importance of public service, what it meant to our community, and how small businesses like ours contributed in their own way to the larger community's benefit. Heather and I are proud of our 4 children and 6 grandchildren, and we're pleased to have most of them, save our 2 daughters that are away at school, living here right in the community. It's a distinct privilege to serve you here in the riding on the kind of questions, cases, and problems you come across in your daily lives where it involves federal departments or agencies. Our most meaningful work is helping people and being their voice in matters of federal responsibility. Every week we handle about 50 cases of constituent inquiry or problem solving, more than 2,000 per year, to help you find your way through the often complicated layers of the federal public service. And on advancing the interests, causes, and projects of the riding more generally, I'm really proud of the achievements the federal government has made here in Simcoe North under 2 governments that benefited from my involvement in speaking up for our riding, from investments in the arts to municipal infrastructure to cleaning up Lake Simcoe, the new campus at Lakehead University, expansion of the Lake Simcoe Regional Airport, and the vast renovations of the Trent Severn Waterway, and building Hope, the new community services hub. I should say the Lighthouse Community Services Hub. This is the kind of spending our governments should be doing to make our communities stronger to help people get ahead. As we look ahead in this election 2019, our party has put forward a plan to move the country forward on energy, the economy, and agriculture, on the environment, immigration, and foreign affairs, and on uniting the Federation in our common purpose as a nation. There is much to do, and we must spend within our means while addressing the issues that face us as Canadians. But people are facing rising expenses and feeling quite less confident about getting ahead financially. If you're a couple in your 20s or 30s facing student debt and looking to purchase your first home, or a senior living on a fixed income. The track that the Trudeau Liberals are currently on will make life more unaffordable. Mr. Trudeau promised a balanced budget within his term, his first term, then he proceeded to run up massive deficits. They don't see us back in balance until way after 2040. The annual cost of servicing that rising national debt will increase 40% to $34 billion in just a few years. Runaway deficits with no plan can only mean one of 2 things: future tax increases or cuts to social programs like health care. And they've already started. If reelected, they say they will put a new 10% excise tax on boats and recreational vehicles, a new tax that will devastate sales and jobs for our region's RV, recreational boating, and marina businesses. Our plan, a fully costed platform, will make life more affordable for you so you can get ahead. And we'll do that while reining in the growth of government spending and getting back to a balanced budget within 5 years. We'll put more money in your pocket while ensuring key social programs and obligations to the provinces remain and improve. We'll cut the GST on home heating and lower taxes for families and seniors. We'll make family benefits under EI tax-free, restore refundable tax credits for fitness and the arts and learning for children, help families saving for their children's university or college by raising the government contribution on RESPs, provide a refundable tax credit of $3,800 to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in your home, and will reinstate the Lake Simcoe Cleanup Fund, $30 million over 4 years to protect the water quality, fishery habitat, and the economy of Lake Simcoe. I'm running so that the people of Simcoe North can get ahead. I look forward to hearing your questions and discussing the important issues facing us here in Simcoe North and Canadians across the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Next, we have Gerry Hawes.
Thank you to the Orilla District Chamber of Commerce for organizing this important event, and to the Lakeland Association of Realtors for sponsoring it so that we can discuss important issues in this election tonight. I look forward to sharing my views and perspectives with you this evening. I grew up in a low-income, blue-collar family, and I'm a lifelong resident of this community. My parents instilled the values of hard work, fairness, equity, and inclusion in us as children, as well as the importance of public service. My brother became a police officer, my sister a soldier, and we all charted a course through roles with a social mission. I decided to run to become your member of parliament because I heard from friends, family, and neighbors that they were concerned about the conservative approach. With conservative cuts to services in Ontario creating uncertainty for Ontario families and their complete inaction on climate change, they're afraid of what would happen with an Andrew Scheer government in Ottawa. I am running as your Liberal candidate to provide you with the strong, progressive representation the people of Simcoe North have long deserved. I have a record of delivering results right here in Simcoe North. As the executive assistant to our former Liberal Member of Parliament, Paul Develair, I know the issues well. I was a central figure in returning and re-establishing the Mariposa Folk Festival to Orilla and have been providing leadership to that organization for the past 20 years. And for the past 10 years, I have been helping to grow the cultural industries in Ontario, like film and television production, with their clean, quality jobs. I know how to serve our communities effectively, and I have the experience to get things done. The Liberal government has made tremendous strides in the past 4 years, like taking concrete action to make housing more affordable through Canada's first ever national housing strategy, investing in Canadians through the very successful Canada Child Benefit, and improvements to income supports for seniors, lifting more than 1 million Canadians out of poverty. Working with Canadians to create more than 1.1 million new jobs, most of them full-time. And a real climate action plan with more than 50 initiatives to tackle climate change, one that reduces pollution, creates jobs, and protects our environment and our future. This election is about continuing to move forward with that great work and electing a strong, progressive member of parliament who will be a key player at the table. The Canada Child Benefit is already helping 17,930 children right here in Simcoe North, and we're increasing the amount for children under the age of 1 by $1,000. We're also creating 250,000 before and after school spaces. With increases to the guaranteed income supplement, we have lifted 50,000 seniors out of poverty, and we're increasing the Canada Pension Plan for future retirees by as much as 50%. With increases to old age security, we're putting $729 more into the pockets of seniors over the age of 75, and we will increase the Canada Pension Plan Survivors Benefit by 25%. The Liberals have the only practical and effective plan to address climate change and grow the economy at the same time. From solutions like planting 2 billion trees, to providing $40,000 to let you retrofit your home, to putting more zero-emission vehicles on the road with a $5,000 incentive, to putting a price on pollution and putting that money back in your pockets. And we are helping Canadians across the country to take real steps to tackle climate change head on. While there is good work being done, there is always more to do. The choice in this election is clear. Either we will elect a Conservative government that wants to make cuts and move us backward, or we will choose to move forward and build upon the progress that we've made. The Liberals have a plan for the future to grow an economy that is sustainable and works for everybody. I ask you to choose forward in this election by voting for me, Gerry Hawes. Thank you. Merci de m'avoir écouté ce soir. Miigwech.
Thank you, Gerry. Okay, next we are going to get into our 4 questions. So first I'm going to start with the 2 from the Orilla District Chamber of Commerce. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer. With 15 seconds left, the timer will raise the flag to give you an indication to wrap up your answer. And of course, the buzzer will go off at that end time, and we, again, respectfully ask you to stop talking at that moment. First Nation reconciliation has been discussed and failed by many federal governments. Locally, the Champlain statue has been part of a much debate within our First Nations communities. Samuel de Champlain engaged in First Nations as equals in a nation-to-nation discussion, according to the Canadian Museum of History. Lost in the debate of the statue is the greater story of the local Magicicaning fishing weirs that were built in 3300 BC, and one of the oldest human developments in Canada. As our Member of Parliament, would you be committed to working with Parks Canada, Magicicaning First Nation, City of Orilla, Ramera Township to preserve the Magicicaning First built an interpretive center while working with First Nations to honor their great past tradition and heritage, working towards a reconciliation? This time we're going to do the opposite, and we'll start with Gerry.
So I would disagree with the premise that Indigenous reconciliation has failed. It's certainly a work in progress, and it's one that the Liberal government is taking very seriously and with great respect for the nation-to-nation relationship. In its response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and in its plan to implement the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples in the first year of the next mandate, the Liberals have proven themselves to be very serious on these matters. Protection of the Magicicaning fish weirs and developing an interpretive center is a matter that I'm very personally interested in and have been casually involved in over the years, including a recent meeting with a leading proponent of the idea. As your new Member of Parliament, you can count on me to advocate for this project in consultation with Rama First Nation, but others as well, to ensure that the federal government does its part.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Bruce Stanton.
Thank you, Raquel, and certainly this would be a project I would be most happy to help with. I mean, there's many resources typically available through federal and provincial government infrastructure programs. And I am familiar with this. The subcommittee here right in the city that worked with the Township of Ramera and the Chippewas of Rama on the design of a pedestrian bridge and interpretive center for the fish weirs, an incredibly unique historic treasure that we have and could be a great feature here in the city of Orilla. Of course, it would require the municipalities and the First Nation involved to make that project a priority. They're always in the driver's seat to decide, which of the various pockets or programs that are available, how they wish to prioritize these projects. But most definitely, if they said yes, rest assured that we'd be there with them to shepherd that project along to fruition.
Thank you. Chris Brown. Oh, sorry. My apologies. Stephen, Makk.
Thank you. I'm a big fan of museums, and the idea of having a facility that celebrates First Nations as technological innovators is particularly interesting. However, I don't have as much background information as my colleagues here. As far as me as an MP, what I would do, I would thoroughly study the proposal, see what kind of benefits to the community it would bring versus the costs, and I would also try to look at it, any policy changes, how they affect all of Canada. And of course, local projects, if they fit a policy that's good for all Canadians and is not trying to be favoritism, I would be all for it. But I would study it quite carefully, and I see this as ripe for a promise to be broken if we're not careful.
Thank you. And Chris Brown?
Thank you. So many points in that question of what was, what could have been, and what we have now. But to answer the question at hand, yes, I would be committed to such a project. But how Canadian does this get not only one of the oldest sites of civilization in Canada, but one of incredible ingenuity as well, and we put up a sign and a plaque. We're not typical of Canada's lack of enthusiasm regarding most things patriotic. I'd be tempted to say the lack of acknowledgement is disrespectful, but it was not likely intended to be that way. The historical value of this site is not being currently reflected by the limited manner in which it has been developed. Its preservation and promotion through Parks Canada in conjunction with local representatives needs addressing. It is a site worthy of being further developed and shown off for visitors to see and hear of something rare and educational, and it wouldn't hurt to bump up a little extra tourism as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Angelique Belcourt. Oh, Angelique.
I just want to make it clear that as an Indigenous woman, I understand the explicit responsibility that I have to this land and to the water. Women are water keepers, and so I just want to say that first and foremost. As an Indigenous person, I'm committed to work with all the Indigenous change makers, so this project is handled in a good way. The Weirs are a sacred place and gathering place for many different communities and peoples in the region. The annual fish harvest has sustained communities from across Ontario and even parts of what is now known as the United States. As your NDP representative, I would certainly bring my heritage and culture to bear in Parliament to champion a celebration of these ancient treasures, bringing together members of Rima First Nations, Mi'kmaq Fish Fence Circle, Parks Canada's elders, teachers, community leaders. It's important to hear their voices and make sure that they have complete control of how to do things in a good way and make sure that our legacies are honored in every step of the journey. Miigwech.
Thank you. And Valerie Powell.
The Green Party respects Indigenous sovereignty over self-determined and self-defined lands. We will make Indigenous nations equal partners with all other levels of government and implement all recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. We will also preserve Indigenous history and make sure it is taught in schools. The Champlain Monument may be a beautiful work of art, but its current composition does not reflect truth or reconciliation. I would work with all stakeholders mentioned on the divided monument issue, and I would love to assist the Inuit community, the Indigenous community, to preserve and promote the historically valuable fish weirs. We travel to Newfoundland or the Yukon to learn and fall in love with our history, and we have the most incredible piece of history right here in Orilla.
Thank you. Now we'll be moving to the second chamber question. In 2019, the federal budget, Prime Minister Trudeau announced $1.7 billion in funding for high-speed internet connectivity across Canada, with the goal being to connect all Canadians via high-speed internet by the year 2030. If your party is successful in the upcoming election, what will be your plan to make this opportunity an affordable reality for all Canadians, including ones that live in rural areas? This time we'll start with Stephen Makk, please.
Thank you. This one's right in my wheelhouse. I'm in fact personally designing systems for broadband wireless in my area. I'm not sure that there's a funding role for the federal government here. I don't see answers like subsidies or corporate welfare as being a good idea. However, as an MP, I would study ways of changing the regulatory regime to allow smaller operators who are more local, understand the local needs, to get licensing quicker and to make sure that barriers to entry are not there. I would think that we need to defend smaller, innovative operators with new technology from these monsters like Rogers and Bell.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Gerry Hawes.
The Liberal government has made it a priority to connect Canadians living in rural and remote regions so they can participate in the digital world. Under the Connect to Innovate program, the Liberals have provided new or enhanced internet access to over 380,000 Canadian households in more than 900 rural and remote communities, including 190 Indigenous communities. The Liberals have also been relentless in promoting competition because that is the best way to bring down prices and increase the quality of telecommunication services, including cell plans. In fact, in regions with strong competition, both urban and rural, wireless data plans are up to 32% cheaper than the national average. We have committed to connect every Canadian to affordable high-speed by 2030. As your Member of Parliament, I will work hard to make sure that the underserviced communities of Simcoe North are at the front of the line for funding.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Chris Brown.
Thank you. Advancing technology, is it your friend? The Terminator movies might suggest not. But kidding aside, there's no doubt that we have benefited from some amazing tech in many fields. However, I have some misgivings concerning the advent of 5G internet, and addressing affordability is mixed into that concern. My 4G phone induces pain within seconds if I hold it near my ear. An upgraded router in my home induced low-grade headaches for days on end till I put the old one back. I know the radiation connected to these things is real, and the potential to affect our bodies is also real. 5G is exponentially more powerful and, quite frankly, scares me. Whole communities in Europe have had to form in rural regions because their sensitivities to this stuff makes exposure unbearable. I can't explain the gung-ho behind this tech when independent scientific testimony has warned of significant dangers to it, but at this point, I can't consider affordability without regarding the potential to disrupt lives that 5G may be capable of. Thank you.
Thank you. And next, Bruce Stanton.
Thank you. A good question on this. We all know that the necessity of having broadband or high-speed internet is becoming that much more critical, especially in rural parts of Canada. And that's true even right here in Simcoe North, different pockets here in Simcoe North. We also know it's a bit of a moving target because expectations and the amount of bandwidth and capacity that's needed is continuing to grow as the demands of software and streaming continue to elevate as well. Sheer government would play a role together with the private sector in trying to make sure that we can roll out the kind of broadband and internet services that people all across our riding need. It's essential also for economic development, that people with home businesses and others that need to connect to work so that they can come and settle here. So I do think there's a role for government to play. Sheer government would have a great hand in that, including a rural affairs minister for Canada that would concentrate on issues just like that.
Thank you. And Valerie Powell.
With a universal broadband strategy of $400 million over 5 years, we would invest in infrastructure to provide all Canadians, including those in rural and remote areas, access to reliable, affordable, high-speed internet. Having said that, with the coming of 5G, that could leapfrog over broadband and make it as historic as power lines are today. We would also establish banking services and public high-speed internet access in post offices, particularly in underserviced rural and remote communities without banks and libraries. Digital infrastructure is essential today. We would amend the CRTC regulations to increase competition in the provision of cellular and internet services to consumers and decouple payments for cell phones from cell services. We would require...
Thank you. And next we have Angelique Belcourt.
Change is possible, the future is bright, and there can be improvements for communication challenges facing residents in both rural and populated areas of Simcoe North. I live in Midland and I don't have access to high-speed internet, and I think that that's a serious problem. Affordable broadband internet for residents and to encourage new businesses to locate here is not a luxury, it's a necessity. As a young person, in light of challenges to the education system in this province, affordable, high-speed service will be critical to students in rural communities, such as mine, to connect with teachers and classes. Likewise, business without fast economical internet access is playing at a disadvantage. Businesses are smart. They're not going to locate in areas that cannot provide fast access to the modern international marketplace. The present government promises a full nationwide broadband to happen by 2030. We cannot wait, and NDP government will focus on how to encourage and require effective, affordable broadband coverage throughout Canada from the first day of office.
Thank you. Now we'll move to our two Lakeland Association of Realtor questions. The first being, do you believe that the mortgage stress test is impacting individuals and families in your riding? What adjustments do you feel should be implemented to address the negative consequences? We'll start with Bruce Stanton.
Thank you. So we're aware that stats have indicated that up to 86% of young Canadians who don't own a home would someday like to. And that's a high number. We're seeing skyrocketing prices of real estate, not just in the big centers, but even in our region here. Our government would take in hand to work with officials in the Office of Financial Services to work on a fix to the stress test, and also work to eliminate the stress test necessity if you change bank in the case of a renewal. We'll also look towards implementing a 30-year mortgage amortization that would give the ability for first-time homeowners to have a less mortgage rate or less mortgage monthly rate that they can afford and at least get into so they can start building up equity in their own home.
Thank you. Now we'll move to Gerry Hawes.
The mortgage stress test is a mechanism that gives borrowers important wiggle room if interest rates rise. Remember what happened in 2008? The American economy collapsed due to inadequate mortgage stress tests and cascading mortgage defaults across the country. Watering down or eliminating the mortgage stress test protection is a bad idea. There are better ways to ensure that Canadians can get into the housing market, and that is to lower the cost of homes. Under the Liberals, Canada has the first ever national housing strategy, a comprehensive integrated framework addressing the high cost of housing across the spectrum of needs. Just yesterday, I toured a facility that is creating quality, desirable housing based on shipping container construction with costs that are 37% less than a traditional build. This is the kind of thinking we need to allow more people to enjoy home ownership.
Thank you. Now Valerie Powell.
The stress test exists to protect borrowers, and as Gerry said, many borrowers in the past have gotten into trouble when when the interest rates rise. Real estate is a market. It can go up and down, and it's based on demand. If we can increase the housing stock, then the affordability will follow along. The Green Party would create penalties for vacant housing. We don't have the problem of international investors, perhaps, in Orilla, but we do have Airbnbs that are vacant and are not lived in by the permanent owner. And some of those homes are raising the prices. We would have incentives to retrofit older homes. So if people can afford to buy, they can make them as energy efficient as new builds.
Thank you. Now we'll hear from Stephen Makk.
Answering the question directly, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with the present mortgage stress tests. We have to keep in mind that there is a good possibility of a recession looming, and I don't think it's doing anybody favors to let them take on more debt than they otherwise would. I think the pros who know risk are the banks and other financial institutions, and we should let them evaluate the risks and sometimes protect people from their own enthusiasm. So I don't think there's a negative consequences from the stress test. I think it's a good thing to have, and it made us get through the last crisis better than the USA did. So let's keep our strong banks and a prudent approach to risk evaluation.
Thank you. Now we'll hear from Chris Brown.
Thank you. There's no doubt that the stress test has impacted mortgage holdings. 2018 saw the slowest growth in mortgage debt in over 25 years. The purpose of the test was to ostensibly help people to not overextend themselves in total monies owing, but this has become like another address on the road of good intentions. There were qualifying limitations already in place, but these new laws have driven even more people away from more regulated institutions to the alternative lender groups that often take on riskier loans at higher rates and suffer greater defaults. It's not that the alternative lenders are necessarily bad or even unwanted, but we don't think it's a good idea to create more market share away from what it was already a well-run mortgage industry. The unintended consequences of this may become more apparent soon as more data becomes available, and this issue will need to be revised. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Angelique Belcourt.
Absolutely, the mortgage stress test is impacting individuals and families in Simcoe North. It is also affecting the real estate industry, but so is the absence of reasonable rent-to-income housing and low-rise housing that is affordable given the existing wage levels. A stress test is only valuable to people seeking to purchase a home. With drops in savings and the decline of disposable income, buying a home may not be the best solution for those seeking shelter for themselves and their families, but the alternatives aren't there either. An NDP government would act on several other approaches to achieving the housing needed by most Canadians. One of these would be to reintroduce the 30-year terms to CMCH insured mortgages on entry-level homes for first-time homebuyers. We'll also give people a hand with closing costs by doubling the homebuyer's tax credit to $1,500. An NDP government will also focus on ensuring that wages and job opportunities exist that allow buyers to save for their own down payments and qualify for mortgage loans.
Thank you. So now we're going to get into the second question. First-time homebuyers incentive is a unique solution to the housing affordability problem experienced by many first-time homebuyers. Do you feel that there are other affordability measures that can help homebuyers? I'm going to start with Angelique Belcourt.
The first-time homebuyers incentive looks great until you read the fine print. It's rough out there for first-time homebuyers in Simcoe County. First-time buyer incentives are completely useless if the first-time buyer can't pass the stress test, which is another discussion altogether. That said, we'd be better on focusing on ensuring that young people and all people are making a living wage that allows them to save for their own down payments and ensuring that they're not drowning in student loans that sink their pre-approvals. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Gerry Hawes.
The first-time homebuyer incentive introduced by the Liberal government is indeed a unique solution to housing affordability and an important part of the national housing strategy. It makes home ownership more affordable to first-time homebuyers by allowing them to reduce their monthly mortgage payments by an average of $286 a month without increasing their down payment. In support of Canada's Climate Action Plan, the Liberals will help 1.5 million Canadians make their homes more energy efficient, provide free energy audits, and provide free interest-free loans of up to $40,000 for retrofits, and a zero homes grant of up to $5,000 to buy newly built homes that are certified zero emissions. We need to address the housing affordability problem across the spectrum of needs. And as your Member of Parliament, I will work hard to ensure that the National Housing Strategy has the maximum positive impact here in Simcoe North.
Thank you. And next we will have Bruce Stanton.
We're not convinced that the first-time home buyers incentive really is going to do the job that it was intended to do. What's lost in the fine print is very strict limitations on eligibility. And it also means that as the value of your home goes up, the price that has to be paid back to the government also rises. And so you get into a situation where you've got to pay back more. Angelique is on the right track on this, finding ways to get a 30-year amortization, fixing the stress test, doing the things that we need to make that first-time home buyer, make that first home purchase more affordable, especially when you consider that on a 30-year amortization, that young couple or young family is going to be able to be in their later earning years, later into that mortgage, to be able to afford it. But they've got to get started. So you got to take the obstacles away from that first-time buyer, and I think those approaches are the most reasonable.
Thank you, and next we'll hear from Valerie Powell.
The first-time buyer's incentive and the 30-year amortization period sometimes encourage people to buy houses way more expensive than they can actually afford. As I said, we want to increase the housing stock, and retrofitting older homes, and for seniors, offsetting the costs of adapting them for accessibility will help to do that. Increasing the density in the municipalities, work with the province and municipalities on affordable housing. We need to refocus the mandate of Canada Mortgage and Housing to non-market and cooperative housing. We need to enable legislation to allow tiny houses more density and innovative design like container homes. And we need to look at affordability for many is affordable rental, not home ownership. So increasing the opportunity of rental properties as well.
Thank you, and now we'll hear from Chris Brown.
Thank you. We view home ownership as a vital part of people's lives and family life first, as an economic factor second. All around, its importance cannot be overestimated. To further boost families and young couples getting into a home, CHP would first limit ownership of business, homes, farmland to Canadian residents only. This would reduce prices that have been fueled by speculative foreign buying. Our proposed elimination of tax on income would immediately free up more cash up front, and when combined with corresponding tax breaks on the home transaction for the first-time young buyers, that first big bite comes a little easier to chew. We would further follow that with tax breaks or exemptions for new families to ease the burden of being parents while in a new purchase or rental accommodation. Cut out foreign buying, eliminate tax on income, freeing up cash, and provide tax breaks and or exemptions on purchases for families would be our solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Now Stephen Makk.
The People's Party would take a completely different approach to this from everybody else. We would address affordability from the revenue and income side by doing broad spectrum. The others are looking at government meddling more. We would take the flabby hand of government off the system and reduce taxes so there's more money for people to afford things. We would reduce regulation so that builders can build more easily, and we would have more capital in the system for producing the housing that people are looking for. So we would like to do whatever we can to reduce taxes and have increase the take-home pay, and also things to improve the productivity of Canadian workers so they can earn more and have better high-paying jobs without government subsidy.
Thank you. Now we will have 30 minutes of media questions. The press will alternate questions to each candidate. Will have 1 minute to answer, again with the flag being raised at 50 seconds remaining and the buzzer at the end.
Good evening. I'm John Swartz from Sun Online Media. I actually heard this phrase, we're going to start to plan. And I heard a few others talk about plans relating to climate change. And the polls are saying overwhelmingly, depending on which one, 2/3 to 3/4 of Canadians, they want action. The time for planning was a decade ago or more. So the question's pretty simple. It's really a yes or no answer. If you're elected, are you going to do something concrete all Canadians can see which demonstrates action on climate change? And I'm sure you'll probably use the rest of your time after a yes or no to tell us what that is.
Okay, we'll start on the right, and we'll start with Chris Brown, please.
Thank you. I have contended that climate hysteria has a hidden agenda that is not about climate. It is about big government taking your money to become even bigger. I'm going to read two quotes. First, from the co-chair of the UN's IPCC. Quote, "We redistribute de facto the world's wealth by climate policy. One has to free oneself from the illusion that international climate policy is environmental policy. This has almost nothing to do with environmental policy anymore." The next is from an elitist think tank. "The threat of environmental crisis will be the international disaster key that will unlock the New World Order." Now, does that sound like a climate agenda, or is it, as I contend, something else? Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll carry on with the right. Angelique, Belcourt.
Let's make one thing clear. Climate change is real. I just want to establish that for any other parties that may deny that. We have the boldest climate plan of all parties that are currently running, and our goal is to work with people and not big corporations. On the first day of office, we've established that we're going to eliminate all fossil fuel industry subsidies, totaling currently up to $3.3 billion. We'll also create an independent office for climate accountability to do regular audits of our climate goals, such as our ambitious science-based greenhouse gas reduction targets, helping stabilize the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Thanks.
Thank you. Now, Bruce Stanton.
So as John alluded, we have a plan as a party, and that remains true for us as well. And we've rolled out a 55-point practical, realizable plan that will actually bring greenhouse gas emissions down here in Canada, but also take the fight on global climate change to the world. And you work with our allies and people around the world to make sure that greenhouse gas emissions globally also start to come down. That means for us exporting the kind of clean technology and resources that we have here in this country, researchers and knowledge otherwise, including clean fuel, to actually help other countries in the world reduce their GHG emissions. We have a responsibility to reduce ours, of course. We've got to meet, at the very least, our Paris Climate Accord commitments, and we have a plan to do that, including improving conservation and the kind of things that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions even in your own home, as I alluded to earlier.
Thank you. Now, Gerry Hawes.
So the Liberal government has done more in its first term of office than any other government in history to deal with climate change. They put forward a 50-point plan. Only one plank of that plan is the carbon tax. There's many other things that have taken place over the first term of government, and we need to put a price on pollution. We can't pretend that we can achieve our goals without doing that. Going forward, the Liberal government will put in place 5-year milestones that are legally binding on the government in order to achieve the goals in the out years. Those milestones will be developed in consultation with economists, environmentalists, and other experts, and they're meant to keep the government's feet to the fire so that successive governments are taking the steps necessary to meet the goals that we have to meet. And, you know, lots of other ideas are coming out in the Liberal platform, such as planting 2 billion trees. I don't have enough time to go through it all, but we will reach net zero emissions by 2050 and surpass our 2030 goals with this plan that the Liberals have put forward.
Thank you. And Valerie Powell.
Our plan is an action plan. It's 20 steps. We have many more policies to back it up. The first one was to declare a climate emergency, which has happened. The second is to establish an inner cabinet of all parties. It will take everybody working together to resolve this because it needs to be resolved quickly. Our targets are stronger and more stringent than the other parties. We need to reduce our our greenhouse gases by 60% by 2030 if we're going to achieve net zero by 2050. If our temperature increases more than 1.5%, we're done as a species.
Thank you. And Stephen Makk.
I like this question because it asks about what we could actually do, and I'd like to turn it around. The PPC will probably not form a majority government this time, so there's very little that I could do to make big change. However, I turn it back. The desire to change climate is something that people want really, really passionately. So I think the people should take action. Don't wait for government. Don't wait for China or America to change their ways. Do what you can in your life to make good decisions towards climate. And if 37 million Canadians all individually make good decisions in favor of the environment, I think we can solve this thing. So get started now. Don't wait for your government.
We'll have the next question from the media, please.
Good evening. I'm Nathan Taylor with Orilla Matters. I don't really have a preamble for this. I just want to know, if elected, what you would do to increase funding and support for affordable housing in Simcoe North. And just to be clear, I'm not interested in what you or your party might have done before. What will you do if you're elected now that hasn't been done?
And we'll start with Stephen Makk, please.
Okay. We would address the question of affordability and availability of housing, again, by looking at the biggest possible picture and doing what we can to get government out of the way of people thriving and having the income to buy the things they want. We would reduce taxes, and in particular in this case, we would reduce the capital gains taxes and corporate taxes to make it easier and more profitable for landlords and owners to build housing that is more suited to low income, because the margins are so tight and the costs can be high, such as costs of default and vacancy. So anything we can do to make the business climate better, I think, will lift all boats and allow the ingenuity of Canadian business people to solve this problem.
Thank you. And next we'll hear from Valerie Powell.
I think we would address poverty and mental health issues at the same time as affordable housing. And our guaranteed livable income would at least take the strain off people, that they could have a roof over their head while they were improving their education and their ability to strive better in society. Personally, I'd like to work with the municipality on innovative new plans. I helped make a presentation about the waterfront, where we were quite concerned that there needed to be density and opportunity in Orilla, and if it couldn't be at the waterfront, to ensure that housing was allotted this similar amount close by to increase the density and the housing. And there has been a lot of opportunity provincially and municipally, and the federal government could.
Thank you. Gerry Hawes.
I mentioned before that the Liberals have we now have the first ever national housing strategy in Canada because of Liberal policy. That's a $40 billion strategy over several years to address the whole spectrum of housing needs across the country, from those who are marginalized and unable to find adequate housing, targeting veterans, women and children, people with disabilities, to first-time homebuyers who are having a hard time getting into the market. One major point I would make about this is that we need provincial cooperation and partnership in this. The federal government cannot do it alone, and here in Ontario we're not seeing very much cooperation when it comes to dealing with the housing needs of the people who live here.
Thank you. And now Bruce Stanton.
I first want to say this is a very polite audience. You applause at every answer we give. It's really unusual. It's very good. I hope I didn't take time away from myself. I just wanted to get that out there. Look, this is a very complex issue. I mean, and we have to approach it on a number of fronts. Part of it is, in fact, making sure people have access to good employment, increasing incomes, jobs, the kind of things that will give them the incomes they need to get into housing, and the things we talked about earlier, getting rid of those barriers to first-time home ownership. But there's also people who are vulnerable Canadians who need the help of governments to get into some kind of housing. And for that, we use a housing first principle here. If we can get people into affordable housing, it helps solve a whole bunch of other ills that will help them get ahead. So we have to work very closely with our provinces and people in the community level that know and understand this best. People like right here in Orilla at Building Hope know and understand well. Work with them, partner with.
Thank you. Angelique, Belcourt.
I'm going to echo what some of my colleagues mentioned about making sure that everyone has access to a living wage, because that's the single most biggest barrier that most people face in securing affordable housing. Our party specifically focuses on affordable housing, not just affordable housing for the average, but what's affordable to you. We want to offer immediate relief for any person that's struggling to make ends meet with rental payments or mortgage payments, offering up to $5,000 a year per family. And we're also focused on building more affordable housing units in Canada, specifically with 500,000 in total, but 250,000 in the first 5 years of our government. And so not only just making sure that people have access and can afford to have affordable housing, but making sure that the infrastructure is actually there for them to live in.
Thank you. And Chris Brown.
Thank you. Touched a little bit on this earlier when I talked about the foreign buying, restricting ownership to Canadian residents only. But we have other ideas as well. Capital expenditure changes with the Bank of Canada, freeing up some low to zero rate type loans that we can provide to provinces to build housing. In particular, I'd be very interested in seeing co-op housing with good profit sharing plans to provide incentives. I think that would be a good route to go for first-time buyers. I would certainly make it affordable. I think as well, giving some tax breaks for rental housing. There's certainly a need for that. Not everyone can be a homeowner, but so they have to have those rental units available. So that's what we would do. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll ask the media for another question.
Hi, Frank Mattis, Orilla Today. In Orilla, like Barrie, opioid-related emergency room visits are more than 3 times the provincial average. What role do you see the federal government playing in helping address this national crisis that's resulting in the deaths of local residents?
Okay, now this time we're going to start with Valerie Powell.
I had a lovely, well-written answer to this, which I've lost. But what I'd like to say is I have 3 friends who've lost children to the opioid crisis. And the opioid crisis is not, it's not limited to the low life on the street, you know, with a needle. It's our children, it's our neighbors, it's our wives, it's people in our community, people who die from overdoses. They're poisoned. It's not. It should. So the Green Party would make it a healthcare emergency, and they would decriminalize all drugs and make sure that naloxone kits were supplied, and that community organizations who were trained and funded to deal with this healthcare crisis.
And now we're going to hear from Bruce Stanton.
Thank you. Another real tough question to answer in 1 minute, quite honestly. But 11 people a day in Canada, that's what the number is that have lost their lives to opioid addictions and the like. It is a health crisis across Canada. We have to take, again, a multifaceted approach here. Part of it is making sure that we address people with addictions, give them the kind of resources they need for rehabilitation and recovery. And it's not just about harm reduction, which those resources need to be there as well. We have to come at it on all fronts, and part of it is interdicting the illegal import of these substances. Much of it that's coming from China comes through the post office in some cases, so the work of our border officials and others to make sure that they're intercepting this stuff from getting into the hands of traffickers here in Canada, it's all part of it. We have to work together, again, community, law enforcement, and the federal government in every facet we can to tamp this down. You hear from people like Evelyn Pollock.
Thank you. And now Chris Brown.
Thank you. There is a program in place already that an independent study has shown tremendous success in reducing the number of hospital emergency uses from 35% of the addicted local population down to 9%. The length of hospital stay from 12 days down to 4. The number of ambulance calls down 67%, and tens of cases of HIV prevented per year. Not perfect, but a great help for everyone involved, but hardly anybody wants them. Many people think negatively towards them. Yes, I'm talking about safe injection sites. These sites do not encourage use. They are weaning users off of by offering free drugs at limited dosage, combined with trained counselors to help them be safe about it and to offer addiction counseling and education. The numbers tell the story of the impact these sites have, and many users are able to leave the lifestyle behind through such help. And when placed in semi-industrial areas, they impact house prices little and draw users away from city cores and other.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Stephen Makk.
There are limited things the federal government can do because addiction is a very personal problem and it is best addressed personally and by medical professionals. We don't believe that drug abuse should be normalized, but at the same time, we need to find effective treatment to address root causes of why do people end up in this situation. That's where we have to look first. And then after looking in that area, we need to find ways of effective rehabilitation to get people to stop being addicted to opioids, because it is possible to get off them. And then finally, I agree with Bruce that we need to control our borders and get these poisons coming out of China to stop, not just opioids with fentanyl in them, but other synthetic drugs that we don't even know what they are. This has to stop, and I think that is the main area where the federal government can do something.
Thank you. Now from Gerry Hawes.
So the proper response to the opioid crisis is a medical approach based on science, facts, and empathy, not on moral condemnation or punitive action. Like every addictive substance, the real problem is demand for opioids. When there is demand, there is supply. Foreign suppliers will always find ways to get profitable illegal substances into the country when there is demand, no matter what we do. What we need to do is treat people for their opioid addiction and address the root causes that led them to become addicted in the first place. We know that punitive measures are ineffective in addressing addiction. This is a medical and social crisis, and we need to deal with it for what it is, and it needs action by all levels of government, agencies, and communities coming together.
Thank you. And Belcourt. Angelique, sorry.
Angelique, yep. I'm just going to say, as a social worker, I've experienced firsthand how bad this opioid crisis is. I've lost 3 clients in the last year. And so I think it's important to have a government that declares that there is a public health emergency related to opioid use and substance use. Further on that, I recognize that a lot of people don't have the wraparound supports that they need to help them overcome substance use, such as affordable housing, equal employment, head-to-toe health care that makes sure that they have access to all their health care needs, such as dental care, mental health care, hearing care, and so making sure that there's a conversation around ending criminalization and ending stigma around substance use is really important. We need to make sure that people who do have substance use concerns have access to local community support networks where they can have access, immediate access to addiction support networks, and also holding drug companies accountable for their part in supplying the opioid crisis.
Thank you. So at this time, we're going to move into the public questions. So all the public, you may line up over here to my left, so your right, depending on where you're at, by the microphone. We'll be limiting you to 2 questions only, one at a time. So we do ask that you do not give any statements, but just questions, and your questions are limited to 45 seconds only. So at the end of each question, you must return to the back of the line. In order to make this forum engaging, we will also not allow for the same question to be asked by multiple people. And myself as the moderator, I have an ability to overrule the question. This debate should be civil, and we reserve the right to ask anyone to leave who is disrespectful to any candidate or has the intent to cause a public disturbance. Candidates will have 1 minute to answer. And the timer, the flag will be raised within 15 seconds, or in your last 15 seconds, so you may wrap up just as we have done before, and the buzzer at the end.
I was concerned about the loss of Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott as key cabinet ministers in the government over the SNC Lavalin affair. They seemed like very capable in their roles. What does their departure say in the government's handling of this issue and their commitment in advancing Indigenous people and women in Canada?
Thank you. We'll start with Bruce Stanton.
Thank you. Well, it's difficult to know just exactly what transpired there in the Liberal caucus and the decision that ultimately ended up there, but I think we've seen how that has played out in the form of media commentary. And ultimately, it showed, I think, the greatest weakness here was the tendency of the government to interfere with, if I could say, and interrupt what was normally expected to be an independent judicial process. That was the chief objection of the Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould, and we saw that her departure, of course, ensued with Minister Philpott also leaving. As to what that says about the government's treatment of Indigenous and peoples and women, that will really be for the public to decide, I'm sure. But for me, the greatest concern is around the government's handling of that in terms of safeguarding judicial independence.
Thank you. And next we'll hear from Gerry Hawes.
Well, I too was disappointed by the loss of these 2 women from cabinet. I was very proud of the fact that we had the first Indigenous female Justice Minister and Attorney General. But it says nothing at all about the role of women in this government. And it says nothing at all about the relationship with Indigenous peoples. I think the government has proven itself in many ways to be a government that takes the role of women seriously, with a cabinet that has as many women as men. And of course, the government has done a lot on to improve the relationship with First Nations, and is acting upon the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the inquiry, and other things. So it says nothing about that. The last point I would make is that there were mistakes made by everybody involved in this issue, and we don't know exactly what went on behind the scenes. But I do feel that it would be any government in that situation would have tripped over its feet, because it's the first time we've ever seen a situation like that here in Canada.
Thank you. And next will be Angelique Belcourt.
Sorry. I'd like to first and foremost thank you for asking that question, just because I had the pleasure of meeting Jody and Jane at Daughters of the Vote, and this event actually occurred just shortly before the event began. And I just think that regardless of the Indigenous piece and regardless of the women's piece, that we need governments that are accountable and transparent in the decisions that they make. And there needs to be bigger conversations around why Canadians feel like if someone is of an Indigenous ancestry or does identify as a woman, that they are feeling discriminated against. And so, yeah, I think that just making sure that governments are just more transparent around their affairs in general. Canadians have the right to know about affairs that are affecting their everyday lives. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And next we'll hear from Valerie Powell.
Any comments I make are speculative and mostly from what I saw in the media. I think I was very sad. I think it was a sad day or weeks for democracy. To me, it was an example of a power differential. And although Gerry says it had nothing to do with the fact that they were women or that Jody Wilson-Raybould was Indigenous, that power differential between white males and any female is always there. And I think the backroom power of government was visible, and I just was horrified at the way it played out and the fact that it was never really resolved. And that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you. And now Chris Brown.
Thank you. Gerry, take note. I agree with you this time. I don't think it has anything to do with these women or these people being women or Indigenous. I think a lot of things that have been said here tonight by a couple of other colleagues are right on. I think we have to be careful. We hear a lot of what happened in the press, but we really don't know the full details. But I will give you, the optics look bad. You know, it's there's always going to be government stuff going on behind the scenes. That's never going to change. But I think until we know the full details, I just think we need to exercise a little caution. But the optics look terrible. Thanks.
Thank you. And now Stephen Makk.
Cabinet secrecy prevents us from really knowing what's going on, so I share the caveat that we rely on media information. Actually, I was kind of hoping that these two intelligent and ethical women would join the People's Party, but one can only dream. What I take from this is an example of simply bad management of a complicated situation and a lapse of ethics. And there's so many issues in this whole SNC-Lavalin situation that really point to a lack of ability by the people managing at the top. It's time for the Liberal Party to get a better leader, or better yet, vote for someone else.
Now we'll have another question from the audience.
Thank you. My question is around the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. In 2006, it was first introduced to the Council and was adopted there and later into the full United Nations Council, with an overwhelming majority of countries adopting that declaration. Sadly, Canada was not one of them and remained an objector country until 2016, when the Liberal government adopted this as accepted the Declaration of the UN Declaration of the Rights of the Indigenous Peoples and adopted it. My question is, what is your personal position on that declaration, and what is your party's position, and what are you willing to do about it when you are elected?
Thank you, and we'll start with Angelique Belcourt.
I hope everyone in this audience is familiar with Romeo Saganash and his Bill 262 that was specifically put in place as a private member's bill to enact UNDRIP as a part of the Constitution and to support Indigenous peoples. So as an MP specifically, that would be one of my first goals, is to bring back Romeo Saganash's Bill 262 to make sure that that is reviewed in our government and make sure that this time around it isn't blocked by a conservative government who's scared to listen to Indigenous people.
And next we'll hear from Stephen Makk.
You know, it used to be Canada, or Canadians were telling the UN what to do and writing a whole lot of some very fundamental UN documents. I don't think Canada needs to be educated by the UN on how to handle its own internal affairs, including affairs with its Aboriginal people. I think we could do more to teach the world than learn from it. So, no, my party doesn't, in general, doesn't support following UN declarations. We can take them on advisement, but I think we would support a Made in Canada approach that respects the relationship that's unique to Canada and its Aboriginal peoples.
Thank you. And next we'll hear from Gerry Hawes.
I support the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples personally, and of course the Liberal Party of Canada supports it as well, and will pass it in the first year of the next term of office. It's very, very unfortunate that this got caught up in games in the Senate. It should not have been blocked by the Conservatives, and this is exactly why we need independent senators appointed to the Senate and not Conservative backroom manipulators, as Andrew Scheer promises to do. The Senate should not be blocking the will of the House of Commons, particularly in a matter of fundamental human rights like this.
Thank you. And now Chris Brown.
Thank you. I echo Stephen's concerns over the interference and involvement of the UN. I've already stated we don't want anything to do with the UN. We look at the truth and reconciliation efforts as noble and that they should continue. But I think there's more to this. If you've ever been betrayed, and I hope you haven't been, but if you've ever been betrayed, you know it cuts to the spirit. It just doesn't hurt. It just doesn't cause some pain. It cuts. And I think the only way to get past where we are, because we're stuck, the only way to get past where we are is to follow the truth and reconciliation efforts. But we need healing, and that healing has to happen at the spiritual level. I would love to be involved in addressing that, and if you ever put me there, I'll be first on the list. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Valerie Powell.
I agree with Green Party policy, which fully embraces all 46 articles of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I'm sorry, I haven't read all 46 articles. I've read a few to make me familiar. I also agree that we should welcome nation-to-nation relationships with Indigenous peoples, that we should have a Council of Canadian Governments, which includes Indigenous nations and peoples as equal partners. And Elizabeth May was the only leader to attend the Assembly of First Nations for their 2019 assembly, and covering a range of policy areas that address inequities. The one, I find it difficult to sit here and talk about it when there are still boil water advisories in many Indigenous communities that we still have not done anything about.
Thank you. And now Bruce Stanton.
Thank you. There are many aspects of the UN Declaration on Indigenous Peoples that certainly we would support. We see the entirety of it as an aspirational document. We didn't support the private members bill that was mentioned earlier because quite honestly, the government of the day, the Liberals, did not come forth with some of the glaring contradictions that adopting that declaration in law would have in its conflict with existing obligations the government has on treaty rights and even constitutional rights in Section 35 of our Constitution. So there are some issues there that would absolutely have to be resolved and reconciled before one could take a UN code, if you will, and incorporate it into Canadian law. Not to say that the discussion wouldn't be worthwhile. I do think it would be, because again, the themes and the objectives of that declaration are very sound.
Thank you. And we'll have one more question from the audience.
Hi, my name's Louise Cohen, and my question is about climate, the climate crisis. And I'd like to hear what your perspective is on the impact of the climate crisis specifically for Simcoe North, and what particular transformation you could say you would like to implement in order to address these issues.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to start first with Chris Brown.
Well, I think you already know my position on climate. So, I mean, if you want some more information about why I take the position I take, out at our table we got tons of information, all recent stuff. We don't think it's a real thing. We think there's something else to it. So in terms of answering your question, I mean, the CHP would sponsor additional research into it. There are a lot of other factors that have not been properly studied, but that would be the direction we would go. We wouldn't take any direct action right now.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll go to Valerie Powell.
The question was directed to what would we do in Simcoe North. I think we can do a lot. There are two parts to this. One is trying to prevent the crisis or mitigate it a little bit. We can do municipal and provincial actions, which is increasing the number of e-vehicles, getting people off driving, the broadband, enabling them to work more from home and not having to drive. Even they say if you can reduce food waste, that's one of the most important things. Work with our farmers on increasing their sustainable carbon capture, planting trees. But we also have to do something about what's coming and mitigate the health concerns, especially those for seniors. There are going to be more heat waves and flooding. We have to do something about stormwater.
Thank you. Now, Bruce Stanton.
Thank you. The impacts of the changing climate are certainly real. We see that here. One only has to look at the insurance industry claims statistics to see how many, the increase in the number of claims for flooded basements and wind damage, the excess weather events that are causing as a result of what we're seeing happening in our world. We all have a responsibility, of course, to do our part, and we do that as individuals, but also through governments. All levels of government have to. I mentioned last night in Midland, I'll say again, organizations like Sustainable Orilla are helping bring better awareness about these issues. We'll do our part here in Canada, we must, but we also have to take this fight globally. The bigger issue around the rising temperatures because of what's happening can only be fought by joining together with the rest of our country's big emitters around the world to help them reduce their emissions. We've got to have a stake in that, and Canada can make a difference in terms of lowering.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Stephen Makk.
I've been trying to think of what is specific to Simcoe North with regard to climate impacts. All I can say is brace for impact. And what we can do is be very careful when we're designing. It's an engineering problem. We have to be very careful in how we design our infrastructure. We better prepare for highly unpredictable water levels. We need to make sure that our infrastructure and like power distribution is robust and ready for bad weather. And hey, if we're wrong and it doesn't go as bad as we say, we'll have some very high quality infrastructure. That's about all I can think of, because we don't have huge emitters here. And I'll go back to my original point is don't wait for government. Start doing what you can where you are to mitigate this and prepare for the worst.
Thank you. Now we'll hear from Angelique Belcourt.
We do experience the effects of climate change here in Simcoe North by having to worry about flooding and forest fires. We believe by the NDP that we should be working more with municipalities and people who understand their territories the best to help them bring up their concerns and create contingency plans to help them prevent concerns related to forest fires and flooding and greater climate change. We need to stop continuously responding to climate change and climate crises. We should be investing in adopting infrastructure that directly curbs climate change by funding energy efficient homes. And we need to work and help municipalities to help with waste management and recycling programs to help work towards a zero waste future.
Thank you. Now we'll hear from Gerry Hawes.
The science on this is absolutely conclusive. There's no doubt about the science. The impact here in Simcoe North is obvious. In my personal case, I had to have a lot of work done to my house because for the first time ever in my house that was built about 1955, when it rained so hard, water was starting to overflow the foundation. That's never happened before. So we're seeing flooding in a lot of situations, like down on Front Street, where the storm system, the sewer systems just cannot deal with the amount of water. Water quality issues in our lakes are going to be impacted by climate change. Insurance rates are being affected, and in some cases, people can't get insurance. That's really a serious matter, and the Liberals are taking firm, pragmatic, effective action on this, not only to stop climate change, because we have to do our part. We cannot rely on it being somebody else's problem, as I've heard tonight. And they're also working to mitigate the impacts of it on homeowners and regular people.
Thank you. Now we'll go to another public question.
Yes, good evening. My question relates to team and consensus building. We may wake up on October 22nd where no one party hit the magical 170 seat number and we have a minority or a hung parliament and a minority government. If that happens and you happen to get elected, you're going to have a whole lot more clout than you ever imagined. You're going to have the ability to say no to the Prime Minister because he may need your support one day. So my question is, you're going to have to work in a situation where you're no longer going to be told what to do. You're going to have to get others to think your way. What in your past have you been able to do successfully to get the other side to come to your thinking? Thank you.
Okay, we'll start with Valerie Powell.
Wow. You think of things, and this is a one-off incident, but I had a huge, I had to go through a lot of discussions because I worked with people with dementia with behaviors, and the psychiatric beds, some of them would not take people with dementia because they said it wasn't a psychiatric problem. And yet our healthcare system, when there was a crisis and somebody was at risk of hurting themselves or somebody else, had to be somewhere safe. And we succeeded in convincing the healthcare system that they had to accommodate that change in diagnosis or acceptance.
Thank you. Now we'll go to Chris Brown.
Thank you. Well, I've got a past, but I don't know if I got a future. I mean, in my past, working with children and youth, I worked with the child, the youth, the families, court systems, police, school, every agency that you could think of that was involved, CAS. So there was a lot of back and forth, advocating, listening. It was quite an experience developing exactly those kinds of skills. Again, whether or not I'm ever going to use them there, but I think the question is good because it is a watershed, and I talked about this before, it's a watershed moment for Canada. Who we have in power, how much power they have, and who they're going to rely on to scratch someone else's back, I think is very significant, and I think to some degree very scary. Thank you.
Thank you. Now Gerry Hawes.
So that was a really good question, and I thank you for asking that question. A minority government doesn't necessarily mean a hung parliament. Oftentimes, minority governments are the most productive kinds of governments, and we've seen that a lot in the past. I personally have worked the halls of power in the House of Commons at Queen's Park. And at Queen's Park, I know how to develop consensus and advance the agenda. So that would be an experience that I would personally relish. I'm a strong, confident, experienced, and effective person. It's one of the main reasons why I decided to run, because I felt like I could provide the strong progressive representation we need here in Simcoe North. And in that kind of environment, that's where I think I would really shine.
Thank you. Now Stephen Makk.
I believe a minority government would be the best possible government, so I'm hoping for that, even if my party isn't part of it. But I would say, from my past, what I have found to be effective is to remove oneself from the question, one's own self-interest, and try to be above the situation and think about the truth. I've been in a couple of situations in large corporations, $100 million level, where I would do an analysis and I went and advised the CEO to shut down an entire division that I was in charge of, including terminating my own employment. I've recommended that about twice. And both times I got a promotion, so sometimes you have to do the hard things and forget about your own self-interest and listen. Spend a lot of time inhaling. Don't start by exhaling.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Angelique Belcourt.
So I'm going to take this question back to my Indigenous worldview. Indigenous people have always had consensus governments, and not only that, but we've had them, they've worked, and they've worked well. We need to come under the understanding as MPs that we are all people at the end of the day, regardless of what our views are, and we need to be working for the people of our constituencies to do so. I don't think that there's necessarily convincing that needs to happen when it comes to sharing ideas, but coming up with creative solutions that fits the needs for everyone. I think just having open, creative dialogue is something that can happen. And again, consensus is possible. We just need to make sure that we have those conversations.
Thank you. And now Bruce Stanton.
I've had the chance, really a privilege actually, to be a chair occupant in the last two parliaments. That's like a deputy speaker and an assistant deputy speaker. And in that role, you get the opportunity to work with all members of the House of Commons, parties of all stripes, and build the kind of relationships you need to try and do your best to keep decorum in the House of Commons. I know those two don't necessarily always go hand in hand for what you see on television. There's other times that it's quite good, in fact, most of the time. But look, even working with my fellow chair occupants, we have a New Democrat, two Liberals, the Honourable Jeff Regan is the principal speaker, working working with him, with Carol Hughes and Anthony Rhoda from the Liberal Party, has just been a tremendous thing to work and understand how we can work as chair occupants to do the best we can. We're all servants of the House, and we do that first and foremost and find the best way we can to serve them and their interests in representing their voices of their constituents.
Thank you. So in conclusion, we would like to thank the Orilla District Chamber of Commerce for holding this debate and our sponsor, the Lakeland Association of Realtors. We would like to thank everyone here and all the candidates along with our volunteers for a meaningful debate. Of course, the election is October 21st, 2019, and I would urge you guys all to get out and vote. I would now like an opportunity for the candidates just to give one last closing remark. 1 minute at the most. So if we want to start with the reverse order of how we started. So first off, we're going to have Gerry Hawes. What it says in here. Oh, sorry.
Now there's the light. Sorry for the delay. I wasn't expecting closing remarks, but I'm more than happy to do that. So we've heard a lot of discussion here tonight on a lot of really important issues, and it was a really civil debate, and I thank you, all of you, for that. I think it's really important that in the cut and thrust of political debate that we can have civil debate on important issues like this, and we certainly did it tonight. My main reason running for public office is that I felt that I could provide stronger progressive representation that is lacking in Simcoe North. I think that the majority of voters in Simcoe North are progressive voters, voters that take climate change very seriously, voters that believe in social equity, and voters that believe that we just need a fresh approach to representation here in this riding after 4 terms of government with the current representation. No personal insult intended to my Conservative colleague, but now's the time to refresh our approach and for once have a progressive representative in Ottawa.
Thank you, and now to Bruce Stanton.
I certainly want to echo the words that Gerry said, at least in respect to this, the wonderful audience and the attentions that you've given to all of us as candidates tonight. Certainly it's a big decision that we have to make on or before the 21st. We have advanced polls, of course, all over the Thanksgiving weekend. I couldn't stress enough the importance of people to get out and vote in this election. There is a lot at stake. As we've outlined in here, our party is on a theme, if you will, of doing what we can to leave a little bit more money in your pocket so you can help get ahead, face the kind of financial squeeze that's in the future. It's a directly different approach than what the current government is taking. We believe in it. It's a good plan that will help bring us back to balance and a good, stable, living within our means way forward on a number of all of the key important issues that we have in front of us. So keep me in mind on Election Day, October 21st, Bruce Stanton, Conservative. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, Stephen Makk.
Canadians have become too used to looking to government to solve all their problems, and the regular parties are always claiming to have the solutions. We're always one more program, one more regulation, one more tax break away from utopia, yet utopia is never delivered. The problem list stays the same election after election, the deficit grows, and it isn't getting any easier to get by. Have you ever considered that the federal government isn't always the answer to everything? Are you comfortable being treated like a subject, being lured by freebies from one hand and pushed by punishments from the other hand of government? The PPC trusts you, the citizen, to know how best to lead your life and how to use your own money. When we're freer, we are stronger and can find a confident unity. When government gets pushed back, you can move forward.
Thank you. And now to Chris Brown.
Hope I can fit this in. You've heard talk tonight of spending on programs and the inevitable debt these will add. It actually may sound great to you if you think it's going to benefit you, but we have a tidal wave of debt collapse heading our way. The bond market is the key to the financial integrity, and never in all of history has a bond of any kind ever had a negative yield. Yet now over $17 trillion of sovereign nation bonds are yielding negative rates. This will not end well. Canada is nearing the end of a very poorly managed recovery and is so in debt by 4 years of inept policies that she's going to be devastated when this breaks. I think we all better be prepared for some lean years ahead. The Bible, which has never been wrong, in over 1,800 prophecies, foretold of the rise of a global governing power in the last days, and we are almost there. My friends, judgment is no longer coming. It has already begun. The time is now to get right with God through Christ. Vote CHP. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Angelique Belcourt.
I believe meaningful change can happen when everyday people come together to have their needs heard and hold governments accountable to listen to them. Canadians deserve a government that invests in their well-being to live in a good way. They need governments who work with them on climate leadership. We don't need prime ministers who march in climate strikes when they are the change makers in power. Our communities deserve to be taken care of. From equitable access to any and all head-to-toe health care, to access to business development, to affordable housing, to affordable child care, and a living wage. An NDP government ensures that these are a reality for all Canadians and that they have a fiscally responsible government to do so and always has. You deserve an NDP or MP that will hold government accountable for you and that you can trust in that relationship. Thank Angelique Belcourt for NDP on October 21st.
Thank you. Now, Valerie Powell.
First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for being part of this democratic process. I don't know where the other 30,000 people are, but you are the core of paying attention. The biggest issue today on the planet is the climate emergency. It has a direct effect on our economy. They're intertwined. A healthy economy and a healthy environment are linked. But we also have to look after our health, our mental health. And according to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, how can people think about a better future when they need food security, safe, affordable housing, a job, child care, health care, mental health care, or their next opioid fix? The Green Party does have core values. If you would like to see our fully costed platform on our values, they are all online.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and again to our sponsors, and we all hope you have a great night. And our timers, yes.